The Lost Lagoon, a silly tale from the world of Take the Gold by Ali Haji Ghafouri. First Mate Mittens breathed in the salty sea air and sighed. Do you smell that, Nibbles?
Squeak,
said the mouse, perched in Mittens's tri-corner hat. No, Nibbles, it's not cheese. It's never cheese. That's the smell of adventure.
Squeak.
Yes, and the captain's growlin' gumbo. Mittens's stomach gurgled at the thought. Speaking of the captain, but Mittens didn't get to finish his thought.
Ahoy, ye scallywags!
Boomed a voice. Heavy footsteps banged across the wooden deck, and Captain Croc's toothy mug came into view.
Soon we be comin' to the Lost Lagoon, wherein we be.
Captain, the first mate complained. If we're to be a respectable pirate outfit, perhaps we could reject the common stereotypes that might lead future generations to a misunderstanding of our manner of conduct.
Future generations can bite me scales, Mittens. This here be a rough and tough pirate outfit. Grammar be your secondary concern to booty.
Squeak, agreed Nibbles, and he thrust his wee cutlass skyward in approval. And perhaps booty should be of secondary concern to navigation? The captain raised his eyebrow in the most aggressive fashion he could manage. Rocks, Captain. Dead ahead.
Right ye be. You're a trusty first mate, Mittens.
The captain turned his great green bulk to the wheel and gave it a mightily careless spin. The ship creaked and turned to starboard, narrowly avoiding the surf-splashed rocks where they sat like crooked teeth guarding the foaming maw of the lagoon. Two thuds followed the turning of the ship. Mittens turned toward the sound and saw two more of the crew coming to their feet.
Ahoy, me hearties! Here be two o' the savagest swashbucklers ever to swash a buckle.
Yes, I know, groaned Mittens. Buttercup and Princess. We've been voyaging together for like 6 months now. It's a bit odd when you introduce them like that every time they fall out of the crow's nest.
6 months up there?
Sighed Princess.
And we haven't caught one crow. I'm starting to think it's a case of false advertising. And besides,
added Buttercup,
we didn't fall. It's called a tactical descent. You might want to brush up on your technique in case we run into the Navy out here.
It was sound advice. As the pirate ship passed the rocks and entered the lagoon, the officers of the Navy were in hot pursuit. From the deck of his flagship, the HMS Goodboy, Admiral Tater watched the buccaneers with a cunning smirk.
It would seem we've cornered Croc and his crew,
mused the Admiral.
Squawk,
Sergeant Beaky noted.
Yes, Beaky, the lagoon is round, and so it does not have corners in the technical sense. However, I advise that you think on this cold logic of yours next time you lament your failed career as a poet.
Squawk, the sergeant replied, ruffling his feathers. There was a great commotion as 2 more officers came bounding across the deck.
Is it time? Should we chase them?
Asked Ensign Lucky.
Pursue.
Lieutenant Bella corrected.
Not chase. We're not after a tennis ball here, Ensign.
Wouldn't that be a treat?
Sighed the Admiral.
I don't expect that this will be a walk in the park. These pirates aren't exactly known for rolling over and playing dead. It'll be a rough time fetching them out of this spot.
Squawk, said Sergeant Beaky with total conviction.
Indeed,
said Admiral Tater.
By this time tomorrow we'll have done our duty. I dare say this day will be one to separate the doggos from the puppers. Lieutenant, take us in.
Aye, aye, Admiral.
Bella nudged the wheel, carefully steering the ship past the rocks. Ensign Lucky panted worriedly. Meanwhile, the pirate ship was just leaving the narrow passage into the lagoon. Before them loomed a pillar of stone with a huge iron-bound chest at its peak.
Fiery furballs!
Exclaimed Princess.
That tower is as tall as our mainmast. How will we ever get up there?
You whine like a landlubber,
bellowed the captain.
Buttercup, get up to the crow's nest and get a rope ready.
Aye, aye,
shouted Buttercup as she scrambled up the mast.
That's the spirit, matey!
The captain spun the wheel hard to starboard, and the ship lurched toward the stone pillar. Mittens eyed the treasure-top tower as it drew closer. The stone was worn smooth by centuries of sea breezes. Squinting, the first mate could barely make out an inscription. "Be warned, trespasser," Mittens read aloud. "This treasure is cursed."
Squeak?
Nibbles asked.
Oh, they always say stuff like that.
Princess declared with a wave of her paw.
This treasure's cursed. That litter box is haunted. This kibble contains artificial flavors and preservatives. They're all just disclaimers intended to protect the manufacturer from any liability.
Just then, the ship passed alongside the pillar.
Swing!
The captain shouted at Buttercup.
Swing for the booty!
Buttercup leapt from the crow's nest, a rope tied to her back leg. She landed atop the stone tower and dug her claws into the lid of the chest just as the ship came about. The rope went taut. Buttercup yowled, but held fast, and as the ship pulled away, she pulled the chest along with her. The rusted iron that held the lid shut creaked and squealed and snapped as the cat-crane chest swung between the sails. Gold coins and jewels showered the deck, pelting the pirates where they stood.
Now that's what I call making it rain.
Buttercup gloated, tossing the broken lid aside before untying her leg and demonstrating her second tactical descent of the day. The pirates cheered at the sight of loot scattered across the deck, but their celebration was cut short by a thunderous groan. The lagoon's placid waters suddenly turned into a tumult of towering waves before giving way to a great green bulk rising from the depths.
I am deeply concerned,
roared the great sea beast,
that, despite the warning inscribed here, you elected to steal my treasure. Is it a question of literacy? Did you not take advantage of one of the many summer reading programs available at your local library?
No one questions the literacy o' me and me crew,
the captain shouted back.
Especially not some scurvy, spineless cephalopod.
Cephalopod may be something of a misclassification for a cryptid. I am, after all, a kraken.
Is that how you say it?
Asked Princess.
I always thought it was pronounced kraken.
Meanwhile, the officers of the Royal Navy had entered the lagoon and were looking on with a mix of horror and bemusement.
I dare say.
Lieutenant Bella dared to say.
This mission has grown somewhat more complicated.
Quite,
agreed Admiral Tater.
When we set out, I'd planned for pirates, typhoons, sirens, perhaps even a mailman. But it's rather unbecoming of a high-seas adventure to drop a kraken in our laps.
Isn't it pronounced kraken?
Asked Ensign Lucky.
Not at all,
replied the Admiral.
Common mistake, though.
What shall we do, Admiral?
Asked the Lieutenant.
Squawk?
Suggested Sergeant Beaky.
Indeed,
said Admiral Tater.
Once more onto the breach, dear friends.
And besides,
the captain was saying,
you can't very well perch a hoard of treasure atop a stone pillar and not expect a pirate raid, can ye?
I simply prefer my wealth to be kept high and dry, as it were,
the Kraken countered.
Though my fiduciary did warn me about leaving cash uninvested, nonetheless, that hardly gives you the right to barge in here and plunder it.
Ye simple-minded squid, this here be no barge, but a fearsome pirate ship.
Let us not stoop to name-calling in our debate,
suggested the Kraken.
Your mother were a cuttlefish,
replied the captain. The Kraken sighed, raised a mighty tentacle far above the waves, and brought it down with a crash, splitting the ship in two.
That be taking things too far, ye overgrown anemone!
The captain sprang over the rail with cutlass drawn and began to grapple with the Kraken. Their battle sent the seas into chaos, and towering waves lifted the incoming Navy vessel high into the air before bringing it crashing down onto the smashed pirate ship. Planks splintered and timbers shivered, and soon the two crews found themselves face to face on the mishmash ruin of their two decks.
We have you now, pirate scum,
declared Admiral Tater as he drew his saber.
Squawk,
agreed Sergeant Beaky.
Squeak,
countered Nibbles from his perch in Mittens's cap. You are dreadfully mistaken, Mittens said to the Admiral. I'll send you to Davy Jones's litter box and be on my way with the Kraken's treasure.
Not a chance!
shouted Bella and Lucky, rushing to join the Admiral. But they'd barely drawn their blades when Princess and Buttercup joined the fray, swinging in from ropes strategically rigged for just such a purpose.
Avast, scallywags!
Cried the two pirates. They fell, rather, tactically descended, onto the two officers, tackling them overboard. A moment later, the Kraken reared up and bellowed over the battle, still clutching the captain aloft in a tentacle.
It's rather impolite to bring your petty squabble to my doorstep. This is a nice neighborhood.
With that, the Kraken brought its innumerable tendrils down upon the intertwined ships. Just as they were crossing swords, Mittens and Tater were surrounded by an explosion of splintered wood, shredded sails, and scattering treasure. First Mate Mittens awoke on the sandy shore of the lagoon. He coughed and sputtered for a moment before setting about the critical task of licking his damp fur, but he was soon interrupted by a familiar voice and turned toward its source.
Squeak!
Called Nibbles as he rowed ashore in Mittens's lost tricorner hat. Glad to see you made it, said the first mate. It's a shame the treasure didn't, though. Mittens looked out on the lagoon, where the last remnants of the ships were sinking beneath the waves. The vague shapes of pirates and officers alike were splashing about in the floating debris. There was no sign of the treasure.
Squeak!
Rebuffed Nibbles as he nosed about in the folds of the cap. A moment later he sat up with a glimmering circle of gold hanging out of his mouth. You crafty bilge rat, Mittens chuckled. He snatched up the coin and examined it in the light of the setting sun.
Squeak!
Agreed Nibbles. A moment later, Mittens had retrieved from his jacket pocket his copy of Taking the Gold, Rules Every Pirate Should Know. He leafed through it briefly, glanced at the solitary coin he held, and then sighed. 1 down, 3 to go.